Hello everyone and welcome to video lecture 3 on camera direction. This one we are looking at how to make beautiful still images for those who are in the film pathway, but also how to set up our camera so that it looks as good as it possibly can. This is important for both the film pathway and the model pathway because you've done all that hard work with the light, material, assets, etc. Now the final stretch is to get the camera working so it shows off your architecture in all of its glory properly. Alright, that's enough from me. Let's get stuck in. Alright, on to the final steps now, looking at the cameras and the camera setup inside Unreal Engine. You might think this is only really relevant for those in the film pathway, but there are some things that you can learn for model pathway here too. For example, if you're creating your executable model, but you want to be able to include a part where once we get to a certain point as an interactivity, we're able to watch some sort of sequence happen in front of us, and then we move on to the next level in terms of building the narrative, in terms of layering in that interaction for people engaging with your architecture. You can still experiment with cameras and you can still make sequences or camera sequences part of your model experience. So this still applies for both the model and the film pathway. As usual, we'll go through an easy version and a little bit harder version. Neither is particularly difficult, it's just some steps to follow. I like to show the easier version though, for those of you who are still in the modeling phase and you just want to take out some exports, and you want to test to see what it's going to look like. The easy option is better for that because you can very quickly get out some still frames. Okay, so the first things first is making a camera, which everybody needs to know how to do. So once we're in roughly a position that we're happy with, we say, yeah, I've moved my camera around, I'm happy with this location that I am here. Come up to the 3 horizontal lines and go down to create camera here. We're going to use a cine camera actor and we place it in there and we can see that's where it is right there. So we can click out of that. And then we're going to go up to here where it says perspective and then come down to the camera we just made, Cine Camera Actor. And now we are inside of the camera. So it says pilot active, we're inside Cine Camera Actor number 3. So wherever we are to move this around, if we rotate, if we move up, down, left, right, we're actually moving the camera around at this point. I'm pretty happy with where it was. Something like that as a 1/3, 2/3. We've got an interesting composition happening here with this spiral, so I like that. I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave it there. So now I'm ready to take my first screenshot. Obviously, you'd be moving yours around, getting it in the proper position first. So that's the simple camera. Let's go ahead and we'll have a look at the simple way to take a render out of there. So if we come back up to our viewport options, what we want to do first is we're going to bump up that screen percentage again. I'm going to push this up to 100. Let that re-render. It's going to just redo some of my shadows for me. And then what I'm going to do is go down to high resolution screenshot, this one down here. Then this dialog box allows you to not only take your screenshot, but control the settings. So by default, this is the current size. So this is a fraction of my screen at the moment. So typically what I'll do is now that I'm at 100%, I want to go 2 times this 100%, and that will get me close to the 4K size monitor that I've got at the moment. So if I hit 2, that's going to be a 2 size multiplier, and that'll be roughly 4K. Obviously, if you're on a smaller monitor, you might need to come up to 3 times, but I would recommend starting at 1 times first, seeing how long that takes and seeing how much your computer struggles with it. I know that I can do 100% at 2 times pretty comfortably, so I'll go ahead and click on capture. And then I'll let this load in real time so you can see how long that takes. There we go. So that was about maybe 5 seconds. And we click on this, see some other renders I've been working with. And there we go, that is the image that we have there. Okay, so we'll notice at the moment I haven't actually set my camera settings. I haven't set the focal length or any of that stuff yet. So we can still do that, we can still experiment with that. But that is how we do our very quick screenshot so we can test and see what it's going to look like. That is the absolute fastest method. All right, so now that we've got how to put our camera in and how to take a screenshot out, let's look at the more complex things we can do inside the camera to improve it. So first things first is we click on our camera while we're still piloting it. So we're still inside because we want to see it in real time. I've got a lot of different elements I can play with here, much more than I had in Twinmotion. It really is the same as having an actual camera inside there. The first thing I want to come down to is my draw focus plane. So draw focus plane is just going to make a whole bunch of purple inside of here. And watch what happens if I click on this little guy and I click on the face there. We'll see that it runs this purple into the frame. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to bump this back down to 64 so it's not going bananas. If I then move this manually, we'll see what's happening. What it's doing is it's pushing and pulling the level through the space to try and figure out what plane our focus is going to be in. I'm going to massage it till I'm just where the lady is kissing the child. Perfect, I'm happy with that. Then I'm going to turn this back off because I know my focus is going to be in the correct area. Give that a second to get rid of all of that purple fuzziness as it re-renders that out. Perfect. So now already, even in this frame here, I can see that, my camera is starting to look a lot better now. I've got more control and I can see the area that I wanted to be in focus is very much in focus. So that is absolutely our first step. Then from there, we could go ahead, bump that screen percentage back up, take another high resolution screenshot so that we've got that there ready to go. What you would then do beyond there is start to play with your aperture, your lens settings, your focal length, and experiment with what is going to work for you, including the current focal length down here underneath your crop settings and your aperture as well. What I want to do now is show you a cinematic camera and some of the settings that I've used in the past to create a really interesting shot. So again, experiment with all of those in your own time, but what I want to do is create an ultra wide shot, a very, very cinematic shot. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to up this squeeze factor. I'm going to double it, in fact. So at the moment we're sitting on 1. I'm going to put that up to 2. I will notice I've got a super wide shot here. And then I'm going to do some cropping. So at the moment, my crop settings are on no crop. I'm going to come down to here and I'm going to put it on the cinematic. So 2.39 is the cinematic ratio. When you go to the cinema, it's in 2.39. So click on that and I've now got the black bars top and bottom and I've got this nice ultra wide. If I was to look around a little bit, you'll see that I've got this really, really cinematic, interesting shot here. That's actually pretty cool like that. I kind of like this center line running down the middle of that shot and this all stretching out towards the camera. That's pretty cool. So that gives us our cinematic framing. Now another thing we can do is actually change the focal length itself. So the moment we're sitting on 8 as our focal length. And if you remember back to the lecture, if we shrink that down, that's going to stretch everything and make it super dynamic. If we blow it up, it's going to flatten things out, but it's going to allow us to change the experience of the image. So let's put this to 20, something like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move around until I feel like I've got the shot I'm looking for. I'm just going to slow my mouse down a little bit. All right, and then I'm going to zoom back in. And what that flattening shot is going to do is it's going to allow us to put an object into the foreground with something really interesting happening in the background. So let me give you an example of that. We go back through that same process again. What I want to do is I want to set my focal point one more time. So I'm just going to come up to my little eyedropper tool with the focus, and then I'm going to focus on the faces in here. And that's got a lot more sharpness. Don't worry too much about this fuzziness. That's just because I'm rendering out at 64% at the moment. That'll go away when we up that screen percentage, and it'll also go away when we take a proper render. If I increase the focal length again, we'll see even more exaggeration of that. So let's bump that up to 40. I'll double it. And then we'll see we still have that object in the background, but it really allows us to pull focus on a specific object and generate that really cinematic experience. So maybe if I come upwards onto these guys down here and look down onto those rocks in the background so you can see more of what's going on, we're able to really push the framing in this particular image. Now for us, our focus typically is going to be more on the architecture itself rather than a character. So you might have a particular detail that's really interesting to you. There might be a rock, there might be a glasswork. You guys might have designed some sort of beautiful, ornate, detailed geometry, whatever that might be. You can pull that into the foreground and have something else into the background, particularly if it's characters like this. We don't want these milk characters in our shot. That's going to kill the photorealism, right? So we'd be doing the inverse. We'd be having the architecture in the foreground and the people in the background. An example of that might be something like this, where we start to pull the architecture into the focus and we have the people off in the background. Again, our people would be materialed properly. It wouldn't just be white in space there, but you get the idea. Our architecture is always the priority for us, but playing with the cinematic camera like this, using the squeeze factor, experimenting with the focal length, can really give you some powerful imagery and powerful expressive cinematic stuff. So I'm going to pull back to that shot we had over there. I think it was more successful. That frame going on in the background. Let's pull it around. I like having that center line through my shot. Pretty interesting. Cool. And then I'm just going to change my focal length one more time. Or actually, let's focus on the architecture. So we're going to make this being our... Yeah, that's nice. In that focal plane, that material looks good. I got those nice sweeping arcs, and the rocks look great too. A little bit of blur on the characters. Okay, I'm happy with this. This is pretty much the position I'm looking for. I'm trying to get that center line in the middle of my shot. I think we're okay. So now I'm ready to take my perspective. Of course, I can jump back up here if I still think I'm going to be doing a little bit more editing. Screen percentage up to 100, high resolution screenshot at 2 times. But now I think I'm good to go. What I'm going to do is, I've already made one here, is make a new folder in your content drawer, call it sequences. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into a sequence, exactly the same process you would in order to give it motion, but we're just going to render out one frame. So we can use Unreal Engine's powerful cinema rendering tool, but just render one frame of it. And that way we get all of the benefits of the amazing rendering for stuff like Marvel movies and Star Wars, but we're just going to render one frame. So we'll click on sequences, and what we're going to do is right click, cinematics, and new level sequence. So this one here, right click, cinematics, new level sequence. I'm going to put that inside there, and I'm going to name it darkness stabby arcs. And once we've done that, we double click on it, and then simple, we grab the cinematic camera actor that we've made, the one we are happy with. We drag it down onto the timeline down on here. And what Unreal Engine is going to do is it's going to create automatically 150 frames of this particular shot for us. And that's set up so that if I want to start keyframing this is the current position of my camera. Then I want to move the camera, pan it closer or zoom it closer to this spike. By the end of the time it gets there, then it will slowly move across that 150 frames to that spike, or whatever I want to do. You can keyframe anything in here. It's exactly the same process as Twinmotion. We start a keyframe at one point where the camera is in one position, we move further along down the timeline, we do another keyframe, move down the timeline, another keyframe, etc. Pretty straightforward. But what we want to do is just take one still out of here. So what we can do is go along to the frame edge, and it's at 150 at the moment. We're going to pull that all the way down to one frame. Just one. That's all we're looking for. One frame. That's what we're going to render out. And then we're good to go. All we need to do is hit Control S. That's going to save that sequencer, so it's not going to have the little asterisks on there over there. And then we need to go up to Window, Cinematics, Movie Render Queue. And then I finished with that. That was a tester before, so I can get rid of that. Click on Render, then we go to Darkness Stabby Arcs, the one we just made, and then we're going to change the settings inside here. So it's on JPEG at the moment, which I'm fine with, perfect. Settings, we do want to add some anti-aliasing. There's a bunch of other stuff up here. We can change the resolution. I'm going to just add anti-aliasing for now. You can experiment with changing the high resolution settings. My sample count is going to be 3. And my temporal, which means stuff that is static, is 5. And so just a bit of clarity around what these are. 3, the spatial sample count is stuff that is moving in the scene. How many samples do we want to take, or how many times are we going to render over it? And then the temporal is the stuff that is static. So my rocks, my people, my architecture. Most of the time for us, our focus is going to be more on static things because architecture typically is static. So unless there's lots of different elements moving around in your scene, and you've got lots of stuff happening, most of the time the proportions, the ratios would be something like this. You can experiment and see what happens for you. You want to turn on override anti-aliasing and just set that to none. Typically you want to do one or the other. So you can either keep the spatial counts down and then try one of the anti-aliasing methods, or override it with none. We'll see if I turn this off, it'll give me a warning and say I need to turn it back on. You can experiment with both and see which one's which. So either those are lower and this is switched off, or these are higher and that is switched on. And then the last one to look at is our output settings. I am going to move this, and I'm just going to put it straight onto my external hard drive. Perfect. And my resolution, I'm going to change this to be 4K, which is 4096, 2048, and the defaults are fine for everything else. Again, there are other settings we can play with. Have a look at the high res up there, but for now, click accept. Then we are ready to go. Render local is what we want, and that just means we're rendering it on the computer we're working on. Click OK, and that will take a while. So I'm going to let this run now. Even though it's only one frame, because we're doing it at high resolution, it's probably going to take anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes to render out that one frame. We're at 4K, we're ultra high resolution, we've got a lot of black and shadowy, difficult stuff in terms of the ray tracing going on here, so we expect that it will take a long time for this particular shot. Alright, that's all finished. That was about 3 minutes for me. Let's go have a look. So I'm pretty happy with that. The lighting on that sweep looks pretty cool. I'm happy with the way that the faces are coming out. I've still got a little bit of blur on there, so I could probably play with the high resolution settings to come out of there. I can also, remember, that's just my key light from my rectangular light, so I can play around with the settings on that as well, and just to see where I can get that. What I'm really happy with is these rocks which are in focus that we chose, because we clicked on here on this front edge of the material, which is the same plane here. They look really good. I'm really happy with the chiaroscuro. Coming back to my sensory manifesto, this black against the rocks that we have on here, I think the materials are looking good. I think the lighting is looking pretty good. I'm very happy with it. By way of comparison, I just want to show you a screenshot of exactly the same image so that we can do a direct comparison. So back up to 100, high resolution screenshot, and I'm going to bump this to 2, and then let's click on capture. Again, this is way quicker, but we're taking a screenshot. We're not doing all of those bounces. We're not taking as much effort to get it all out for us. So let's have a look and we'll compare the pair. So that is our high resolution screenshot. This is our rendered high quality version. So the thing to look out for as we toggle between the two is the blurriness of the shadow. So we've gotten rid of some of that. I'm just still not totally happy with the noise that's coming out through there, but we can edit that a bit more. But also what we notice is in the screenshot, so back on the screenshot now, the shadows aren't quite as good. The edges of the rocks aren't quite as crisp, and the same thing up on this peeling rusted material, losing just a little bit of all of the edges. It might be hard to see on the screen recording that's coming through, but definitely the crispness that's coming with those flakes through here. Maybe if I zoom in a little bit more and then I do a comparison there, we see that that's actually quite blurry along there. I am just losing some of those flakes a little bit. Even the blackness of the black isn't coming out as well in the screenshot as it is in the high res. If we look at the blackness that we have over here by comparison to the screenshot, it grays out just ever so slightly. The anti-aliasing, the shadow work around here, because it didn't have as many samples going through, it's just not quite as clean. So the key takeaway though is this high resolution screenshot is still bloody good. It's still good enough for us to be able to see what's going on while we're still doing our modeling. Obviously, if that's in focus and if this guy here is in focus, not quite good enough for final cuts, but it is good enough for us to be doing all of our testing. And then when we're ready, we can take our final cuts through the movie render. If I was to pull our frame edge out to, let's say, the 75 mark, and just quickly, I'll explain what I meant before. If I then, while I've got my Cine Camera Actor selected, come down to where it says transform and hit the little plus icon, that will add a new keyframe there at that point. Then what I can do is stretch my timeline along. Let's go to the end, and I'm just going to pull forwards to there, and we'll click on the plus icon again, and then we'll see as we scroll back through that, we've created a sequence tracking with our camera. As promised, just as easy as Twinmotion, we can key in anything. So whether you're in the film pathway or the model pathway, you could use the sequencer and some keyframing to either make your clips for the film pathway, or in the model pathway, as I said before, you might want to create some sort of sequence that happens somewhere along the journey, like when we're playing a video game and we have a clip that plays and then we move on to the next thing. Maybe that is an interaction you want to layer in. So understanding the cameras will help you do that. So one last thing I want to show you, I wasn't really happy with the way that shadow was coming out blurry from the key light over here. And I just wanted to test something before I had a look at the rectangular light, and found in the settings box here, if you go load save preset, there's a stills ultra setting in here. So if you click on that one, it will load the preset for you. It's going to export it as an EXR, which means you have to take it into Photoshop first before you convert it to a JPEG. But it's already done all of the work for the anti-aliasing. It's got some game overrides, which I don't fully understand, but it's got that in there. And then it's got that high resolution output with settings already in there for you. Choose where you want it to go. It did take longer again. So as we saw, it was 3 seconds for the screenshot, 3 minutes for the movie render queue that I took before. But then on these settings, it was around about 6 or 7 minutes. So we're doubling by going on these settings. However, if we open up in Photoshop and we have a look at the outcome, we'll see that it's cleaned up all of that key light, blurry, shadowy business that we had from there before. I'm still happy with the way the material looks sweet. And then the shadowing and the light over here on the rocks, beautiful. Very, very happy with that. Happy with the chiaroscuro, happy with the reflections, happy with the way everything's looking. And I reckon if these were real people, the shadows, and because they would have different materials, would look even better as well. So I'd say for the final, if we want to have that ultra high looking setting, changing to the still ultra from the load save presets will give you the best quality image you can get. Looks pretty good, pretty happy with the outcome, definitely the best of the three. So experiment with your 3 options that you have available there. Definitely leave this one till the last. Don't do that preset until you know for sure that you're ready to send it off for your final render before your submission. But before that, experiment with the other settings and of course, have fun. And there we have it. That is the end of video lecture 3 on camera direction. Now, just one final reminder before you tune out, those in the film pathway, I know the next video is on interactivity, but it is going to help you in adding motion into your scenes. So if you know how to move things up and down as we approach them, if you know how to give motion to objects, if you know how to add 3-dimensional sound inside the spaces, all of these things are going to help add more visual dynamism into your shot. So even though it says interactivity, I highly encourage you in the film pathway that you do watch the next video anyway, because it's going to give you even more stuff to show. Remember, there's 2 ways to give motion to our scenes. We can either move the camera itself while the object stays static, or the camera stays still and we give the objects motion. To give the objects motion, watch the next video on interactivity. Okay, that's all for now. See you on the next one. Happy modeling.